joining me now, former Speaker of the House, a man who has put himself out there, author of the book, March to the Majority, Newt Gingrich. Okay, Mr. Speaker, how do you shift into a general election mode? What does that mean? What does Trump stop talking about? Where does he start going? What does it mean to the layperson who doesn't understand how presidential politics work?
Well, he's done a pretty good job the last couple of days of focusing on Joe Biden rather than Nikki Haley. So that's part one. Part two is you look at issues that build a Trump coalition, which has to include a lot of independents, has to include a lot of suburban women, a lot of minority groups. And so you begin to lay out a series of issues that attract you a lot bigger group than just the Republican base. And I think that you'll see President Trump do this in a very methodical way. And I think he will have quite a large impact.
How do you do that? How do you try to expand the coalition as he has to, bring independents into the tent without horribly offending the people who brung you there? You know, the GOP base. This is obviously a dance you've had to play many times. How does one walk that tightrope?
Well, I think what you do, and this is what makes, I think, a Trump conservatism different than a lot of traditional Republicans. You emphasize the values that you share. Most Asian Americans, Latino Americans, African Americans, most of them believe in the work ethic. Most of them would like lower taxes. Most of them would like to be safe. Most of them would like to protect their children from fentanyl. You go down the list. These are all issues that appeal to a very broad coalition, including MAGA Republicans, but a lot of non-MAGA Republicans. What you find, and this is partly a comment on how the modern Democratic Party has become a radical left-wing party. Their values are now so far away from normal, everyday Americans that you can build a coalition. We have a project called the America's New Majority Project, which you can see at americasnewmajorityproject.com. And we have been polling since 2018, looking for very large majorities. And we, for example, 84% of the country, 84% believe that parents have the right to know what's happening with their children. Now that includes African Americans, Latino Americans, Asian Americans, as well as traditional Republicans. So you campaign with that example. You're bringing together a very big coalition, and you're isolating Joe Biden and the left-wingers who believe that they should have the right to brainwash your child, and you shouldn't have anything to do with it.
Dude, how much does election integrity concern you when it comes to winning that majority in 2024? And no, I'm not talking about voting machines being hacked or something like that. But last time, look, we had the Federal Bureau of Investigation take part in our election. We did. Send the intelligence agencies took part in our election.
The fact that the Democrats have actively encouraged millions of people to come here illegally. We've just learned that they apparently used your tax money to fly 350,000 illegal immigrants. That's about a third of the population of the state of Rhode Island, or virtually the population of the state of Wyoming. They've been flown into this country illegally by your own government in a secret program. And when you look at it, you say to yourself, why are they so desperate to have that many illegals? I've concluded that, in fact, they intend to vote them this fall. That the reason they don't want to have voter ID, the reason they don't want to have a requirement that you vote in an orderly way, is they intend to flood the system with people who are here illegally. And I think that's part of why you see such desperate Democratic support for keeping the border open, for having people come in illegally, and for doing nothing to bring the current crisis under control.
You have a piece up on Gingrich 360 talking about the Trump coalition versus the Roosevelt coalition. For people who are not as astute on American history as you are, first of all, what in the heck was the Roosevelt coalition?
Well, in 1932, when the Great Depression crushed Herbert Hoover, who was the Republican president, President Roosevelt, who was a brilliant politician, put together a very broad group of people who collectively agreed that the government had to step in and do things. Social Security would be an example. He put together African Americans in the North where they were allowed to vote, Southern segregationists, labor unions, college professors, a really wide group of people came together, and they formed a governing coalition, which has been the dominant political organization from 1932 basically to today. Trump began to challenge that head on in 2015 and 16. And the reason the left is so ferocious in its assault on Trump and its effort to basically legally assassinate him is that they believe that Trump will end their world. And I think they're right. What Trump has done, which is really amazing, he naturally, by his own background, when he was in real estate, he was building things. He wasn't just in finance. So he has a long record of working with blue-collar workers. He also had a TV show, The Apprentice, which was very popular with everyday normal Americans. And so he has an instinct for speaking in the language and representing everyday Americans. The result has been, as the left has gotten weirder and weirder, people who used to be Democrats find themselves now being Trump Republicans. And this has been going on now for the last period of years since 2015. And literally, you're seeing a profound shift. If you are a Harvard graduate, you're probably now a Democrat. On the other hand, if you're a blue-collar worker, you're probably now a Republican. That is an exact reverse of the politics of the last 90 years.
Speaking of FDR, his health was of great concern at the end, and frankly, it was a problem at the end. You can argue historically it really hurt the world because FDR was still hanging on and hung on too long, kind of got his lunch eaten by Stalin a little bit there at the end. Joe Biden, setting aside all of his disastrous policies, is not physically or mentally able to be president of the United States of America. And I can't believe we have to have this conversation. Everyone can see it. Everyone knows.
Yeah, there's a huge difference. FDR, despite having had polio in 1923 and being in a wheelchair, at a time, by the way, when the news media didn't show the wheelchair, and when on key occasions he actually stood with the help of very severe metal braces. Roosevelt was an enormously powerful person who had an extraordinarily smart brain, and he really was the commander-in-chief. I mean, in World War II, there's no question, he was the decisive strategist for the United States. He did get very ill towards the end, and we're very fortunate that he dumped his vice president, Henry Wallace, who was very left-wing, and replaced him with Harry Truman, who was much more conservative. But Truman had no idea what was going on because Roosevelt didn't particularly brief him. And when Roosevelt did die, and he had been ill for a long time, but he had still been basically the dominant decision maker. I think the difference here is, first of all, Biden was never as smart as Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Biden was at best about an average person when he was in the Senate. Biden now clearly has aged in a way which makes it, I can't imagine him actually being commander-in-chief. And I think that's scary. We live in a very dangerous world. Russia, Pakistan, India, China, Korea, Iran, all have nuclear weapons. Things could go very bad very fast. There is no possibility that Joe Biden would know what he was doing in that kind of a setting. And I think that's a real threat as a citizen. Forget being partisan. Just as a citizen, you have to have a president who's capable of being commander-in-chief.